villages has not just the effect, but also the purpose of reinforcing Armenia's project of maintaining a mono-ethnic Armenian settlement in the formerly occupied territories. Azerbaijan's request thus raises plausible rights under CERD. I begin with the evidence of Armenia's policy of discrimination against Azerbaijanis. Last week, Azerbaijan submitted its memorial demonstrating that Armenia acted with discriminatory purpose throughout its armed aggression and occupation of Azerbaijan's sovereign territory, including the violent expulsion of every single Azerbaijani living in the occupied territories. The evidence that Azerbaijan has submitted to the court in its memorial and the accompanying annexes sets out in great detail the brutal nature and devastating consequences of Armenia's ethnic cleansing campaign, including the steps it took to prevent and deter those displaced Azerbaijani civilians from exercising their right to return to their homes. Given the limited time available this morning, I respectfully refer the court to last week's submission for the full discussion of Armenia's breaches in this regard. For purposes of today's argument, it suffices to highlight a few points that demonstrate the continuity of purpose and of plan in Armenia's deliberate use of explosive devices targeted at the displaced Azerbaijani civilians who plan to return to their homes in the liberated territories. First, Armenia has made no secret of its intentions. In an interview he gave in 2000, former President and Prime Minister Sargsyan explained Armenia's massacre of Azerbaijani civilians at Khojaly in 1992 by stating, and I quote, "Before Khojaly, Azerbaijanis thought Armenians could not raise hand at innocent civilians. It was necessary to break all this, so it happened." Close quote. And in case there was doubt about the reason for Armenia's aggression and occupation of Azerbaijan's territory and the integration of the occupied territories into a greater Armenia, he stated bluntly, "The most important thing is not the territory. It's that one ethnic group is left in Armenia." Mr. Sargsyan was not alone in those views. To this day, his political party, the Republican Party of Armenia, which ruled Armenia for 20 of the 30 years of the occupation, still proudly calls itself, and I quote, "the ideological and political successor of Nejde Segakron, with Garagin Nejde's teaching as its ideological basis." Why is that meaningful in a CERD context? These are just some of the teachings of Nejde. That Azerbaijanis have, and I quote, "for centuries had more dog traits than human ones." That being a Segakron, the very thing celebrated on the RPA website, and I quote, "requires worshipping the blood of the race and defeating the enemy of my race, the Turks," end quote, where Turks is a term widely used in Armenia to refer to Azerbaijanis. Second, Armenia's ethnic cleansing campaign was merciless, and its racially motivated nature was evidenced by the deliberate targeting of symbols of Azerbaijani culture and identity. These attacks on cultural objects are compelling evidence of ethnic animus, as the court acknowledged in the Bosnia genocide case, and I quote, "Deliberate destruction of the historical, cultural, and religious heritage of a protected group may be highly significant inasmuch as it is directed to the elimination of all traces of the group's cultural or religious presence." That deliberate destruction is what Azerbaijan found upon liberation. In headstones across the formerly occupied territories, in Agdam, Fuzuli, Gubadli, Jabrail, Kelbajar, Lachin, and Zengilan, the faces of deceased Azerbaijanis on headstones were shot at, scratched out, or obliterated in a blatant display of hatred. These photographs show the remnants of the famous mosaic of the Agdam Bread Museum, which before Armenia's occupation showed men, women, and children in traditional dress, carrying symbols of Agdam and musical instruments. Now, as you can see, the remaining mosaic tiles are scarred with bullet holes targeting the faces, breasts, and genitals of the Azerbaijani women, and the child one of them holds in her arms. Third, Armenia did not end its scorched earth campaign when it agreed to the trilateral statement. On the contrary, it continued the campaign in the areas that it had explicitly agreed to return to Azerbaijan, including the district of Kelbajar and most of the district of Lachin. The purpose was clear. For example, one Armenian soldier in the Kelbajar district was recorded as saying, in reference to the returning Azerbaijanis, "Let them live here if they can," as he burned an Azerbaijani house to the ground. When the former route of the Lachin corridor was returned to Azerbaijan's control just a few months ago, some of the departing settlers destroyed and defiled the houses they had occupied, rather than see those homes peacefully returned to their rightful owners. We see this in a video clip of an Armenian settler submitted in Annex 4 to Azerbaijan's request, who did not want, and I quote, "the Turk to benefit of this house," and used lighter fluid, a broom, and a match to burn it to the ground. We see it in the photographs also submitted in Annex 4 of the deliberate, ethnically motivated insults left for returning Azerbaijanis to find in their home. A severed pig's foot hanging from a light fixture, its blood splashed on the walls. And to drive it home, the words "pig's blood" smeared on that wall, in that blood, in Cyrillic Azerbaijani. This is what ethnic hatred looks like. Targeted at a population driven from their homes and returning decades later to be greeted by this devastation and desecration. To Azerbaijan's knowledge, none of these acts of deliberate, cruel vandalism and destruction have been properly investigated or punished by Armenia. Instead, Armenia has welcomed and compensated the settlers who sought to leave behind a ruin to which no Azerbaijani could or would return. Armenia's supplemental Annex 2, filed last week, does not change this picture. On the contrary, it confirms that neither Armenia nor its installed regime is serious about actually deterring these kinds of hate crimes, because any criminal charges brought were dropped on spurious grounds. Armenia's planting of booby traps and laying of landmines manufactured in 2021 in areas it agreed to return to Azerbaijan, specifically to effect the return of Azerbaijani IDPs, likewise reflects Armenia's ongoing purpose to make the formerly occupied territories uninhabitable by Azerbaijanis. Deterring Azerbaijanis from ever returning to their homes is an essential element of Armenia's goal to make and keep the formerly occupied territories a permanently monoethnic Armenian area, ethnically cleansed of Azerbaijanis. As noted, Azerbaijan has found booby traps in civilian homes and other civilian buildings that had belonged to Azerbaijanis before the occupation. Armenia does not dispute that the booby traps were found in these locations, nor does it dispute that it is never permissible under international law to place booby traps in these civilian areas. That is self-evident outside the context of armed hostilities. But even in times of war, as the ICRC has explained, quote, "The use of booby traps which are in any way attached to or associated with objects or persons entitled to special protection under international humanitarian law, or with objects that are likely to attract civilians, is prohibited," close quote. International law likewise obliges Armenia not to impede the safe return of IDPs to their homes. In short, there is no acceptable excuse. Whatever reason Armenia could offer for laying landmines cannot apply to booby-trapping civilians' homes in areas where Armenia knew Azerbaijani IDPs would be returning. As Armenia itself admits in its Annex 1, where it tries to distance itself from these horrific devices, booby traps are, and I quote, "too unpredictable and ineffective for military operations," end quote. Too ineffective for war, but very ineffective at inflicting terror. This afternoon, Armenia will undoubtedly contend that it bears no responsibility for these booby traps. That is the only argument it has left. But just consider what is shown by the photographs now on the screen of the devices discovered by Azerbaijan. On the left, the booby trap, attached to a stable door in Sus, is a hand grenade rigged so that the action of opening the door pulls the pin. Packed around the grenade are sharp metal nails that would become deadly shrapnel in the ensuing explosion, radiating out to hit anyone within reach. In the middle, the booby trap, discovered in a sewing factory in Zabukh, is comprised of a hand grenade hidden under an anti-personnel mine, so that lifting the mine after it is deactivated will detonate the grenade. On the right, the device consists of not one, not two, but 3 anti-personnel explosive wave mines stacked on top of each other. To be clear, this is not the work of an angry settler destroying a home with household items rather than see it go back to an Azerbaijani. These and the devices shown on previous slides were constructed with military equipment: hand grenades, detonators, rifle grenades, landmines, and mortar shells, carefully rigged to explode when someone opens a door, steps across a threshold, or lifts a mine they believe they have safely deactivated. Moreover, constructing and placing these kinds of booby traps without inadvertently detonating them requires specific training and expertise. It reflects specialized knowledge of explosives and specialized knowledge of mine clearance practices to have the kind of targeting reflected in the grenade hidden under the mine. It is implausible, to put it mildly, that these devices could have been designed, constructed, and laid without the involvement of the Armenian military. And in any event, as Mr. Lowe explained, Article 2 of CERD requires Armenia not to, quote, sponsor, defend, or support racial discrimination, close quote, and Armenia cannot evade responsibility by arguing that someone else planted the booby traps if they were acting with Armenia's sponsorship or support. Finally, it will not escape the court, in considering both the technical expertise demonstrated and the purpose that motivated it, that in each one of these instances, the booby traps are carefully and intentionally designed to maximize the harm inflicted, to delay or prevent their safe removal, to target the people engaged in clearing mines, and to ensure deaths, not just injuries. Azerbaijan does not know how many more booby traps it will find, or where they may be hidden. But that is precisely the point. Keeping secret and unknowable the location and number of traps, and the degree of risk that Azerbaijanis face in returning to their homes, serves Armenia's purpose of terrorizing Azerbaijani civilians into staying away from their homes in the formerly occupied territories. This evidence amply satisfies the requirement of a plausible showing of a CERD breach. There is no conceivable military purpose and no possible justification for Armenia's use of booby traps to target returning Azerbaijani civilians and those engaged in the mine clearance work that will make it safe for those IDPs to return home. In these circumstances, the racially discriminatory purpose of the booby traps is undeniable. New evidence also shows that Armenia laid new landmines in Azerbaijan's territory after the ceasefire went into effect in November 2020, not in the heat of combat or chaos of retreat, as Armenia previously claimed. As Azerbaijan has sought to bring these landmines to the attention of the international community, Armenia has repeatedly disclaimed any responsibility. But as its denials are refuted by evidence, as its representations to the court are belied by the facts, Armenia keeps changing its story. And as the evidence has mounted of Armenia's continued practice of planting landmines in Azerbaijan's territory after the trilateral statement, its excuses have grown ever more fanciful. In the last hearing, in October 2021, Armenia's agent and counsel assured the court that it is, quote, not planting landmines in the territory of the Republic of Azerbaijan, specifically including in the territory where Russian peacekeepers are now temporarily deployed. The landmines in these territories, Armenia argued, were, quote, defensive landmines that had been, quote, left in place along the line of contact in the eastern and northern part of Nagorno-Karabakh, end quote, quote, given the military purpose that they served, end quote. The true facts began to come to light last summer. In August 2022, Azerbaijan found 1,259 Armenian mines, all of them manufactured in 2021, near the villages of Ikinci and Birinci.
Excuse me, Ms. Reed. Could you slow down the pace of your remarks, please, for the benefit of the interpreters? Thank you.
Yes, Madam President. Azerbaijan then found an additional minefield consisting of 350 mines near Ikinci in November 2022, again consisting entirely of mines manufactured in Armenia in 2021. Azerbaijan also found Armenian-made mines near the village of Baglipaya in Kalbajar district in August 2022. All three villages were inhabited by ethnic Azerbaijanis before Armenia's occupation, and are areas to which those expelled from their homes will be returning. In response to these alarming discoveries, Azerbaijan immediately raised the issue with Russian peacekeepers. Since Armenia had to be using the Lachin Road, the only route connecting Armenia with the formerly occupied territories, and which, as you heard yesterday, is under Russian peacekeeper control, to transport those mines into Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan also alerted the United Nations in August, November, and December, and the court in September 2022. Armenia denied that it had anything to do with these mines. In October 2022, for example, Armenia told the OSCE that it does not even manufacture landmines, a claim it has repeated for many years. So the unearthed mines that Azerbaijan has been documenting could not be Armenian. Armenia went even further and alleged that Azerbaijan itself must have planted its own mines in, quote, areas that came under its control as a result of incursion into the territory of Armenia. Armenia made similar denials in its responses to Azerbaijan's letters to the court, including its letter of 27 September 2022. We now know that Armenia's claim that it does not make landmines was false. As the evidence submitted by Azerbaijan shows, an Armenian company headquartered in Yerevan, Haikmek, has made weapons and ordnance for the armed forces of Armenia, including landmines, under license from Armenia for the last 19 years. Annexes 29 through 31 to Azerbaijan's request show the decisions of the Armenian government to issue that license to Haikmek in 2004 and to renew it at regular intervals in the following years. The mines that Haikmek manufactures are the same mines that Azerbaijan discovered in its territory starting in August 2022. The court will also recall that back in October 2021, Armenia's counsel assured the court that any, quote, fresh set of explosive remnants of war was spawned by the 2020 conflict, and argued that it would be implausible to think that such mines, which it described as having been laid, quote, in the heat of a sudden military attack, end quote, were for the purpose of, quote, anything other than defensive maneuvers, close quote. We now know that this is not true. The mines Azerbaijan has unearthed have markings required by the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons that identify their origin and date of manufacture. In this photograph, the red box on the left indicates the location where the mines were manufactured, in Yerevan. And critically, the box on the right indicates the year that each of these mines was manufactured, 21 for 2021. So the thousands of these new landmines that Azerbaijan has so far discovered in its territory were manufactured in 2021, and thus could only have been laid well after Armenia agreed in the trilateral statement to, quote, a complete ceasefire and termination of all military activities, and the withdrawal of its armed forces from Azerbaijan's territory. Faced with this evidence, Armenia's latest annex submission no longer denies that the mines are in fact Armenian, or that they were in fact manufactured in 2021. But even as it concedes these facts, Armenia refuses to admit the final fact that would doom its defense: that these 2021 mines were transported into Azerbaijan and planted by Armenia exactly where Azerbaijan discovered them, in locations close to civilians' homes. Instead, it insists in its Annex 1 that the landmines were, quote, taken by Azerbaijan from the sovereign territories of the Republic of Armenia, close quote. But this claim does not withstand scrutiny. In November 2022, as shown on the screen, Azerbaijan invited several foreign military attachés to inspect the landmines that it discovered in Lachin in that month. Members of the press corps were also invited to document this newsworthy event in Azerbaijan's territory. In other words, Azerbaijan did not just tell the world that it had found these landmines where it said it did, it showed them. To understand exactly what Armenia is now claiming, the screen shows a map with the areas in question. On that map, the places where Armenia now claims Azerbaijan dug up the mines are located to the left of the dotted red line illustrating the border between the two states. So Armenia's latest story is that Azerbaijan entered these areas, dug up thousands of these deadly devices without accidentally detonating any of them, then either disarmed all of them immediately or transported thousands of armed devices across the entire breadth of Lachin district, all to set up a staged photo shoot. Madam President, honorable members of the court, that is not a plausible explanation. It is fantasy, unsupported by a shred of evidence. Now, this afternoon, Armenia may try to change its story yet again and claim that even if Azerbaijan did in fact discover the mines in its territory, there is a legitimate defensive purpose for laying these mines. But again, consider the evidence. More than 1,600 of the newly discovered mines were planted in or near civilian areas in Lachin and Kalbajar districts, shown by the orange triangles on the map. There is no apparent military purpose to lay mines in these areas. They are far from the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and far from the old line of contact between the parties' armed forces in the northern and eastern parts of the formerly occupied territories, which is shown by the thick red line along the top of the map on the screen. In its quest for a viable defense, Armenia's new annexes suggest that it may claim that there is another, newer, quote, line of contact, end quote, between the so-called defense army and Azerbaijan, quote, according to the trilateral statement. As Azerbaijan's agent has explained, however, there is no such thing. The trilateral statement does not contemplate, much less condone, the creation of a new line of contact deep in Azerbaijan's territory. It mandates, quote, the withdrawal of Armenian troops, end quote, and the return of these areas to Azerbaijan. Active hostilities had ended. Russian peacekeepers had been deployed to a specific area in the liberated territories, and Armenia knew that Azerbaijani IDPs would be returning to the very areas it was handing over, which had been populated exclusively by ethnic Azerbaijanis prior to the occupation. Laying landmines in these circumstances serves no purpose except to kill, harm, and intimidate Azerbaijani civilians. Unable now to disclaim production of the mines or to offer any legitimate justification for laying them, Armenia may try two last lines of defense, both equally unavailing. First, Armenia suggests in its Annex 1 that the areas on and around Saribaba Heights, where the over 1,600 mines near the villages of Ikinci İpek and Birinci İpek were found, were, quote, not civilian settlements, but open, uninhabited areas, close quote. But the Azerbaijanis who lived and will live again in these villages are, of course, not confined to their homes. They include farmers, shepherds, cattle herders who have every right to use the surrounding lands without stumbling into minefields. This is no hypothetical danger. Several Azerbaijanis have been killed or injured by landmines while farming or tending to livestock since the trilateral statement was signed. Next, Armenia has submitted evidence from the Halo Trust depicting casualties from landmines and unexploded ordnance in Karabakh between 1995 and 2021. No one is disputing that mine contamination has been a long-standing problem across the liberated territories. Indeed, the total number of Azerbaijani casualties from mines and ordnance dating back to 1991 is 3,361 persons. But that does not change the urgent situation that brings Azerbaijan to the court today. Armenia's continued laying of new mines after the trilateral statement in areas targeting Azerbaijani civilians. To summarize then, Armenia's claim that it does not make landmines? False. Its representation to the court that any new mines were laid only in the context of active military operations in late 2020? False. Its explanations for the discovery of these Armenian-made landmines in or near civilian areas, far away from any border or former line of contact, sheer fantasy, supported only by a deliberate misreading of the trilateral statement. Most importantly, regardless of any asserted military purpose, CERD forbids the use of mines if either their purpose or effect is to prevent Azerbaijani civilians from returning to their homes or otherwise nullify or impair their human rights on the basis of ethnic origin or national origin. In the absence of any recognizable, non-discriminatory military purpose, the inference of a racially discriminatory purpose becomes unavoidable. And Armenia's refusal to disclose information about its minefields that will save civilian lives is inexcusable, whether under customary or conventional international law or under the elementary considerations of humanity discussed by Mr. Lowe. The evidence Azerbaijan has submitted makes clear that Armenia's booby traps and landmines were planted for the purpose and have the effect of placing Azerbaijanis as an ethnic or national origin group selectively at risk of death or dismemberment and of deterring their exercise of their right to return home. Either the purpose or the effect of Armenia's conduct is a sufficient and independent ground to grant the requested measures. Both undeniably implicate plausible rights under CERD. I thank the court for its kind attention and ask that you call Professor Boisson de Chazoun to address the link between the requested measures and the rights that are in issue, as well as the urgent need for the court's intervention.
I thank Ms. Reid, and I now invite Professor Laurence Boisson de Chazoun to address the court. You have the floor, Professor.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, distinguished members of the court, it's a major honour for me to appear before your court on behalf of the Republic of Azerbaijan. Let me start off with looking at the link between the rights in vote and the measures requested by the Republic of Azerbaijan, and subsequently I'll look at the imminent and real risk of irreparable prejudice to the rights in issue. My colleagues, Mrs. Amerfar and Reid, have demonstrated that the rights claimed by Azerbaijan are plausible. Now, it falls to me at this stage to demonstrate that another condition for handing down provisional measures is met, namely, that there has to be a link between the rights whose protection is sought and the provisional measures being requested. On this point, I can be brief. There is indeed a clear link between the plausible rights that Azerbaijan seeks to preserve under the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, CERD, and the provisional measures requested. Each and every measure requested by Azerbaijan is aimed at preventing Armenia from denying the fundamental rights to security, safety, and the right, of Azerbaijani citizens to return to their homes, and that includes Azerbaijani IDPs. To this day, Azerbaijan has no certainty that Armenia will not continue to lay landmines and booby traps in civilian areas of Azerbaijan. To the contrary, Azerbaijan continues to discover an alarming number of Armenian landmines. Since August 2022, Azerbaijan has found more than 2,700 landmines manufactured in Armenia in 2021. Now let me underscore this date, 2021. Armenia has quite simply continued to lay mines in Azerbaijan in total disregard of its obligation under CERD and other international instruments, and that includes the Trilateral Declaration. In this respect, let me recall to the Court's attention what Armenia said before your court in 2021, namely that they had never used mines to target persons of Azerbaijani ethnic origin, not before the armed conflict in 2020, not during that armed conflict, and not thereafter. Now, as you heard today, in October 2022, Azerbaijan found booby traps in civilian homes in the villages of Zabukhansus in the region of Lachin. These booby traps were found in hallways, behind entry doors, and in the courtyards of some of these homes. The provisional measures requested are aimed at protecting the rights of Azerbaijanis under the CERD against these real and imminent threats. As long as Azerbaijan does not enjoy the cooperation of Armenia, thanks to provisional measures which you will hand down, Azerbaijan will not be able to rapidly and efficiently eliminate the explosive devices on its territory, and its population's lives will remain in danger. The measures requested are specifically targeting the extant menaces threatening Azerbaijanis either in civilian areas of newly liberated territories or seeking to return there. The aim of these provisional measures, is to put an end to the unlawful actions of Armenia directed against Azerbaijanis on the basis of ethnic or national origin. These measures are vital to ensure the safety of Azerbaijanis and to ensure that Azerbaijanis, including those who are working to rebuild the liberated territories, can return there without the constant threat of death or serious injury. These measures aim at preserving the specific rights provided under Articles 2 through 5 of the CERD. The Court, I quote you, has the power to indicate provisional measures when irreparable prejudice could be caused to rights which are the subject of judicial proceedings, or when the alleged disregard of such rights may entail irreparable consequences. End of quotation. Furthermore, the Court has also declared that you would only exercise this power, I quote, if there is urgency in the sense that there is a real and imminent risk that irreparable prejudice will be caused to the rights claimed before the Court gives its final decision. End of citation. The irreparable prejudice which Azerbaijan is trying to protect itself against via provisional measures is quite simple. It's nothing more nor less than a question of life or death. Since the signature of the trilateral declaration, explosive devices laid by Armenia, such as landmines and booby traps, have made 282 Azerbaijani victims, including 33 civilians killed and 86 wounded by landmines. Since the court handed down its order on 7 December 2021, landmines have accounted for 45 civilian victims, and that includes workers on building sites, reconstruction building sites, and individuals engaged in mine clearance operations. Furthermore, the number of victims that I've just mentioned isn't a static, fixed number. Quite to the contrary, it can evolve significantly. Indeed, both the finding of these explosive devices and the collection of documentation regarding the deaths caused by them require lengthy and fastidious investigations. The civilian population affected by the current conflict is extremely vulnerable. Recurring blasts are making conditions increasingly difficult for Azerbaijanis returning to their territories. To this day, numerous uncertainties remain regarding the exact number and location of landmines and booby traps deployed by Armenia on Azerbaijani territory in the regions formerly inhabited by Azerbaijani civilians. And because of this, Azerbaijanis are faced with a very difficult choice: to not be able to return to the lands from which they've been exiled during the 30-year Armenian occupation, or to return at the risk of their lives. Azerbaijan requests the court now to order the provisional measures requested in order to preserve rights protected by CERD from the real and imminent risk which threatens them. On a number of occasions, the court has handed down provisional measures regarding the protection of fundamental rights enshrined in the CERD. In its order of 7 December 2021, the court recognized that Articles 5b and 5d, which are the subject of the Azerbaijani request, as well as other provisions of the CERD, are, I quote, are such that prejudice to them could be irreparable. End of quotation. In the case Georgia versus Russia, the court considered, I quote, that violations of the right to security of persons and of the right to protection by the state against violence or bodily harm, Article 5, Para B, could involve potential loss of life or bodily injury, and could therefore cause irreparable prejudice. End of quotation. Your court also indicated, I quote, violations of the right to freedom of movement and residence within the state borders, paragraph D(I), could also cause irreparable prejudice in situations where the persons concerned are exposed to privation, hardship, anguish, and even danger to life and health. End of quotation. The court concludes from this that, I quote, individuals forced to leave their own place of residence and deprived of their right to return could, depending on the circumstances, be subject to a serious risk of irreparable prejudice. End of quotation. By exposing Azerbaijanis to a constant threat of death or serious injury in or near civilian areas, towns and villages of liberated territories, Armenia is subjecting Azerbaijanis to a distressing and harrowing fate and posing serious risks for their very lives. As my colleagues, Ms. Amafar and Ms. Reid, explained, the actions undertaken by Armenia have for purpose and effect the targeting of Azerbaijanis on account of their ethnic and national origin. The rights protected by CERD, including that of the security of person, freedom of movement, and residents within the border of a state are thus undermined and are vulnerable to irreparable prejudice, as the court has already observed. There is a real and imminent risk that this irreparable prejudice will take place before the court rules on the merits of the case. Furthermore, Armenia's laying of landmines and booby traps in or near civilian areas in Azerbaijan, and this since November 2020, and the refusal of Armenia, furthermore, to provide information on the location, the quantity, type, or characteristics of said devices, present an imminent menace and threat. Without the measures requested, Armenia's actions will continue to threaten and to wound, to kill, and to destroy the lives of many Azerbaijanis. The resulting consequences would be irreparable and in breach of Article 5 of CERD. Now, as your court has pointed out, let me quote you again, the condition of urgency is met when the acts susceptible of causing irreparable prejudice can occur at any moment before the court makes a final decision on the case. End of quotation. Your court has also pointed out that the risk of irreparable prejudice is real and imminent when the affected group, I quote, remains vulnerable with regard to their rights under Article 5 of the Convention. End of quote. Similarly, the court considered that such risks exist when there is evidence that these acts are ongoing, or that prior acts are such that, I continue to quote, the consequences apparently resulting from this situation and that the impact on those affected seem to persist to this date, end of quotation. Now, in the instant case, violations are ongoing and they do risk persisting unless the court intervenes. Every single time an Azerbaijani has sought to return to their land of origin, their lives have been endangered. Azerbaijan has done everything it possibly can to mitigate this danger, inter alia by limiting the movement of population in the zones not yet cleared of mines. But despite these protective measures, certain Azerbaijanis have not been able to resist the desire to return to those territories from which they have been separated for almost 30 years. And the danger is everywhere. Armenia didn't just deploy explosive devices in those regions formerly inhabited by a civilian population. We've also placed these mines in holy places, for example, in cemeteries. For example, on 21 October 2022, the explosion, the blast from a landmine in a village cemetery in Suarisi-Lachin killed one person and wounded another. There is no doubt, therefore, that landmines and booby traps deployed by Armenia impair the right of return of Azerbaijani IDPs. Now, this is a real tragedy, and it's a real tragedy which is happening in full view of everyone. The continuing and targeted deployment of Armenia of mines in civilian areas constitutes a serious threat to Azerbaijani mine clearing and reconstruction endeavours within Azerbaijani territory, which have been devastated by 30 years of occupation. Since the liberation of these territories, Azerbaijan has done everything it could to revitalise them, to rebuild them, to facilitate the return of Azerbaijani IDPs as fast as possible. Now, some IDPs have just but one wish: go back home. I'm just going to quote one example here. Let me mention the testimony of Madame Zabila Mamadova, an Azerbaijani and internally displaced person who used to teach in the town of Susha. In February 21, what did she say?
Taking almost 30 years for Susa to be liberated so we can return, or how should I say it, to run back there. Fancy.
End of quote. Now, to this end, Azerbaijan adopted a state program which is known as the Great Return, Le Grand Retour in French, to facilitate the return home of IDPs. Numerous are those currently working on the reconstruction building sites in the regions of Lachin and Kalbajar, and hundreds of other Azerbaijanis are working at mine clearance operations in these territories. Now, every day that goes by is a new threat for these people. Are they going to get back home from work, or will they die from some mine blast on site? The irreparable breach to Azerbaijani IDP's right of return is both imminent and real. In your order of December 2021, the court said, I quote, "A policy of driving persons of a certain national or ethnic origin from a particular area, as well as preventing their return thereto, can implicate rights under CERD, and that such a policy can be effected through a variety of military means," end of quotation. The existence of landmines and booby traps is specifically aimed at preventing the return of Azerbaijani IDPs. The right of an individual to return to his home is a fundamental right which should not be suspended. And that is why your court must encourage Armenia to help Azerbaijan to facilitate this return. Now, what's in danger is not just the life of individuals, but also their dignity and their fundamental freedoms. Without the provisional measures requested, Armenia's actions will continue to inflict irreparable harm to Azerbaijanis seeking to return to and to civilians working in these areas. Thus, the deployment by Armenia of landmines and booby traps in Azerbaijani territory presents a real and imminent risk of causing irreparable prejudice to those rights protected under Article 5 of the CERD. I'd also like to draw the attention of the court to the urgency of the situation, and this on account of Azerbaijan's repeated discoveries over the last months of landmines and booby traps deployed most likely in Azerbaijani territory between 2021 and 2022. These discoveries coincide, moreover, with the refusal of Armenia to take part in negotiations aimed at putting an end to these dangerous and discriminatory acts. As Azerbaijan's agent pointed out, Azerbaijan has tried on numerous occasions to initiate bilateral and multilateral negotiations with Armenia, but they were all to no avail. They started, as you can see, all of this when we met and tried to meet. And in 2022, Armenia decided without notice not to take part in discussions which to be held in Moscow. So, forced into a corner, Azerbaijan decided to turn once again to your court and to request provisional measures, absent which thousands of lives will remain threatened by Armenian mines and booby traps. For all of these reasons, a serious risk of irreparable prejudice will persist as long as Armenia will not receive the order to cease laying landmines and placing booby traps in Azerbaijan, to cease facilitating others to this end, and to cease using the Lachin corridor to transport these explosive devices. The refusal of Armenia to provide information about the location of these mines and booby traps creates a real and continuous risk to Azerbaijani civilians working or wishing to return to their homes in the region of Lachin and Kalbajar or in the other formerly occupied regions. They will continue to die. They will continue to suffer serious injury. These risks are imminent and will not cease existing unless the court hands down the measures requested. So, distinguished members of the court, this brings me to the end of my oral pleading, and the measures demanded are necessary. So it falls to me to thank the court for your kind attention, and I would like you now, Madam President, to please give the floor to Mr. Elnur Mammadov, agent of the Republic of Azerbaijan.
I thank Professor Bassam Shazern, and I now invite the agent of Azerbaijan, His Excellency Mr. Elnur Mammadov, to address the court. You have the floor, Excellency.
Madam President, distinguished members of the court, it is a privilege for me to address you once again and to present to you the final submissions of the Republic of Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is before the court today to request urgent assistance in order to safeguard its rights and the rights of Azerbaijanis under the CERD. As has been explained by Counsel for Azerbaijan, the purpose and the effect of Armenia's laying landmines and booby traps in Azerbaijani civilian areas is to prevent Azerbaijanis from returning to the formerly occupied territories. Armenia has continued to lay mines and place booby traps after having agreed to ending hostilities and returning these areas to Azerbaijan. What other reason could Armenia have to lay in 2021 landmines deep into Azerbaijan territory? What other reason could Armenia have to place more deadly booby traps in civilian homes? I will now read out the final submissions on behalf of the Republic of Azerbaijan in English.
Of the rules of court on the basis of the facts and laws set out in the Republic of Azerbaijan's request for the indication of provisional measures of protection dated January 3rd, 2023, and for the reasons explained during these hearings, the Republic of Azerbaijan respectfully asks the court to indicate the following provisional measures. A. Armenia shall immediately take all necessary steps to enable Azerbaijan to undertake the prompt, safe, and effective demining of the towns, villages, and other areas to which Azerbaijani civilians will return in Elachin district, Kalbajar district, and other formerly occupied districts of Azerbaijan, including by providing information about the location, quantity, type, and characteristics of landmines, booby traps, and any other explosive devices in these areas, in order to enable Azerbaijani internally displaced persons to return to their homes. And B, Armenia shall immediately cease and desist from any further efforts to plant or to sponsor or support the planting of landmines and booby traps in these areas to which Azerbaijani civilians will return in Azerbaijan's territory, including but not limited to the use of the Lachin corridor for this purpose. Madam President, honorable members of the court, I thank you for your kind attention to this urgent matter. I would also like to thank all members of the registry and the interpreters for their dedicated work throughout the hearings.
I thank the agent of Azerbaijan, whose statement brings to an end the single round of oral argument of Azerbaijan, as well as this morning's sitting. The court will meet again this afternoon at 4 p.m. to hear Armenia present its single round of oral argument. The sitting is adjourned.